many, many attacks have been launched at the Catholic Church trying to demonstrate that it is in fact not biblical. Some have all gone as far as to call it the mother of harlots and the mother of abominations. A latest manifestation of this attack appears in a book called A Woman Rides the Beast by a certain Dave Hunt. The book claims to talk about the Roman Catholic Church and the latter days, although it can be more accurately characterized as just a raw attack and a very misleading one on the Roman Catholic Church. I'm Julius Matona. This is What Catholics Believe. With me to discuss fundamentalist attacks on Catholic history and Catholic positions and Catholic theology is Father William Jenkins. Father Jenkins is a Roman Catholic priest who has adhered to the traditions and celebrates the traditional Latin Mass exclusively. Father Jenkins, it's my impression on reading the book is that there are so many factual inaccuracies just liberally sprinkled throughout the book that it's almost like the response of the demons upon exorcism, we are legion. But I think one has to begin somewhere, and I think really what a point is that the reader who reads this book should be aware that they should take this, to put it mildly, with a grain of salt. And our purpose is not to attack anyone personally, but to inspire perhaps a serious inquiry with truly an open mind and an open heart. The first thing which I think is striking is that Mr. Hunt has this to say. He says on page 44, the prefix, and I quote Mr. Hunt, anti, A-N-T-I, comes from the Greek language and has two meanings, according to Mr. Hunt: opposed to and in the place of or a substitute for. Then he says the Latin equivalent of the Greek anti is vicarious, from which comes vicar. Thus, vicar of Christ literally means antichrist. What's your reaction to that bit of linguistic gymnastics?
Well, like so much else in the book, Julius, that's not true. It's simply not true. Anybody can really check into that by going to the sources. Can go to any dictionary and look up the word vicar. I'd recommend going to the Oxford English Dictionary, which is considered the authority on the English language, and look up the meaning of the word vicar. You'll see that what he says there is absolutely not true. He's trying somehow to translate vicar of Christ to mean antichrist, but so much of this book is nothing but a collection of calumnies, right? Page after page of calumny. Calumny is a lie told with the intention of damaging someone's reputation. In this case, he's attacking an institution which is divinely established by Christ himself. So it's a very grave crime to do that. He does this by perhaps once in a while citing something factual, but then weaving a tale around it which is meant to prove his point, and his point is not good. His point is to attack the church in a very scurrilous fashion by using spurious arguments.
Actually, if one were to look at a Latin dictionary under vicarius, a Latin-English dictionary, the definition would be vicar. And a vicar is someone who is delegated to do something. Anti...
basically a representative.
Right.
And that's what the papacy was established to do. It was in order to establish someone here on earth who would represent our Lord Jesus Christ.
Given that as an anti, by the way, does mean before, as opposed to, anti, A-N-T-E, would mean before, right, prior to, so there's a big difference. But I think this gives a flavor for the tenor of the entire book, and I think we can go to the next...
See, I think anybody who, shall I say, has an average or better than average education would read that and say, no, there's something wrong with that, because this goes contrary to what I know to be true.
Correct.
And I would hope that'd be the case anyway. Well, so as soon as someone comes across a section like that in this book, again, A Woman Rides the Beast by Dave Hunt, I would think that he would be put on notice that what he's going to read is a diatribe and not an analysis or anything reliably factual.
It's something which certainly objectively one can say undermines the man's credibility, because he's either ignorant or attempting to twist and deceive and just acting as a polemicist and a demagogue. But the next one, which is a little more meat to this one, he says the following on page 55. The Vatican has consistently fought every democratic advance from absolute monarchies toward government by the people, beginning with England's Magna Carta, the mother of European constitutions. That vital document was denounced immediately by Pope Innocent III, who pronounced it null and void and excommunicated the English barons who obtained it and absolved the king of his oath to the barons. Encouraged by the Pope, King John brought in foreign mercenaries to fight the barons. And he says subsequent popes did all in their power to help John's successor, Henry III, overturn the Magna Carta, impoverishing the country with papal taxes. Nevertheless, the barons finally prevailed. It's interesting when one looks at the facts of the case.
Right, that is a total distortion.
First of all, it's interesting that, number one, if you look at a book called Western Civilization, A Catholic History, first of all, King John carried on a conflict with the church for 14 years. He attempted to put one of his sympathizers in as Archbishop of Canterbury because that also had a political overtone.
King John was a tyrant, and he tried to dominate the church, too.
And what happened is Pope Innocent III put in a Cardinal Stephen Langton. That was his selection to be Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, John did not permit him to land in England. He refused to let him in the country, at which point Pope Innocent III put the entire country under interdict, which means they couldn't celebrate the Mass or have the sacraments. Now, John was excommunicated by Pope Innocent II. An interdict was imposed. He was removed as King of England by Innocent, and that there was some discussion about that. So to say that he somehow promoted him was totally false. Moreover, the Magna Carta was written by Stephen Langton, the appointee of Pope Innocent III. Exactly. And now, while it is true that Innocent III declared the Magna Carta, the signing, null and void, maybe you can expound on this. The reason is that it was done by force, and King John did not sign it of his own free will, and the Pope, in essence, was the Lord of England, and the barons did not go through the proper channels and appeal to him rather than taking the law into their own hands. In fact, it was a kind of a vigilante effort, and I think that's what he opposed.
Well, at one point, King John was afraid that the barons were going to rise up against him, and so he actually gave the Pope a certain right over England, even a political right over England. And so the Pope was appealing to that right. He believed that the signing of the Magna Carta was not done in the correct way. He didn't object to the Magna Carta itself, but if it was going to be put into effect, he wanted it to be put into effect legally. And originally it was not. But actually, Pope Innocent III, as you say, sent Stephen Langton to England to prevent John II from imposing his own feudal warlord as an archbishop there. And that shows, again, the independence of the church against the civil power, and refusing to allow the civil power to control the church for its own purposes.
And it certainly makes the statement false that, quote, the Vatican has consistently fought every democratic advance from absolute monarchies. What he also does in relation with this, he said that Pope Gregory XVI, in his so-called outrageous encyclical Mirari Vos of 1832, said that the church, he asserted the right of the church to use force, and like countless popes before him, demanded that civil authorities promptly imprison any non-Catholics who dared to preach and practice their faith. Now, I don't think this is at all true that anyone who tried to practice a non-Catholic faith was imprisoned by the Pope.
Well, this man distorts things. We've seen that, and well, we will see it more and more if we look through that book. But he's going to make hay with it. You know, with every accusation he makes, there is a response. The response could take a book, or at least a paragraph, to respond to a single sentence. Because anybody can accuse anyone of anything, and then, of course, you have to prove that you didn't do what they accuse you of doing. much more difficult to prove that you didn't do something.
There's a lot more questions than answers.
Well, he makes these statements, and you notice, by the way, that when he does give a citation to back up his statements, the citations refer to those who are avowed enemies of the church, apostate Catholics who have an axe to grind against the church, and he appeals to them, and he constantly cites them as you know, renowned Catholic historians and you know, worthy Catholic historians and devout Catholic historians.
Right.
But the men are apostates. One is an apostate Jesuit. Another one is a man who fell away from the church in the last century.
Well, this is a good point, Father, right about that. There was a Father Dolinger, Ignatius Dolinger. He quoted him as, he refers to him as eminent historian of the 19th century, and he said, attributes to Dolinger, which he may have said, our absolutist system, 3 dots, ellipse, meaning who knows what follows, but he said, our absolutist system cannot endure any other than absolutist governments. Could you please comment on that and also give us some background about Father Dolinger and his role in Vatican I?
Well, I'll start with Dolinger for one thing. Dolinger actually left, he was considered a theological expert at Vatican I, but he left there because he disagreed with the teachings of the council ratified by the Supreme Pontiff, Pope Pius IX. And he ended his days, as I understand it, outside of the Catholic Church. He gave impetus to what was called the Old Catholic movement, but he never joined it himself. They were importuning him to join, but he would not join it. And so he simply retired from the scene. But he left disgruntled, and so this man appeals to him as though he were a Catholic, but he was not, certainly, running as a Catholic at this time. The point that he's making there, our absolutist system cannot tolerate any, what did he say?
And endure any other than absolutist governments. And again, what he does, he says, our absolutist system, and there's an ellipse, meaning who knows what goes in between those two statements,
Well,
cannot...
actually, the Catholic Church has been historically the great opponent of absolutist governments. And well, I mean, you could turn to any place along the Church's history and refer to some statement made by the Supreme Pontiffs or, you know, some authority in the Church. Take, for example, Pope Pius VI back in the 1790s, who stated flatly that the Church does not concern itself with the forms of government, whether it be a republic, whether it be a monarchy, whether it be an aristocracy. He said the Church is indifferent to these things. He said the important thing is that the laws of any true government, Christian government, must conform themselves to the teachings of the gospel. He said that's what's important. And not only that, but if you read the writings of some of the eminent Catholic theologians, truly Catholic theologians, not like the
some who left the Church,
he chooses to cite as, to attack the Church, but men like St. Robert Bellarmine. St. Robert Bellarmine stated very clearly that the authority, the governing authority over nations actually does come from God through the people. The Church, the Catholic Church, never taught the divine right of kings. That was a Protestant formulation that came in after Martin Luther. Martin Luther even said the religion of the area must follow the religion of the prince. That was not the teaching of the Church whatsoever. The Church rejected this teaching of the divine right of kings and said that the authority of God resides in the people, and it is in those whom the people invest with that authority. But once the people have invested that authority in some king or an aristocratic assembly, then the people have to respect that authority.
You know, one of the real distortions that Mr. Hunt tries to establish is that, number one, the Church was always in favor of oppression. They oppressed poor people. They became rich at the result of abusing poor people. They were for, you know, against workers, that they're just like a tyrannical and absolutist. But what about something like Pope Leo XIII and Rerum Novarum, the encyclical on the condition of working classes, which was actually attacked as being socialistic and very, very liberal?
Well, the Pope was coming to the aid of the common working man, you know, and he was upholding his rights. And he was reminding capital that they could not be mercantilists or absolutists as far as the almighty dollar or the almighty pound or the almighty yen or any of the kind. But he said that they have to treat their workers with respect because each one of them, you know, is redeemed by Christ, and has an immortal soul, created in the image and likeness of God. The Pope's statement there is to insist on the recognition of the rights of the working man. If anybody can verify this, I mean, people who are willing to read that book should be willing then to go and try to see what truth might lie in it. And you could find by reading Quadragesimo Anno, which refers back to Rerum Novarum. These are
Pius XI, right,
that are available through any Catholic, worthy of the name, any Catholic bookstore. Or they could contact us if they're interested, what Catholics believe, and we'll get copies for them. And they'll see what the popes actually wrote. And they'll see that what the popes wrote are certainly not what are attributed to the popes by this man.
Just to give our viewers a flavor of the vitriol that is contained in this book, just to give you a few quotes, he says the following: Hitler and Mussolini were praised by the Pope and church leaders as men chosen by God. Catholics were forbidden to oppose Mussolini. The church virtually put Mussolini and later Hitler in office. And then the church hierarchy praised Hitler, sometimes extravagantly. And then he says, Pope Pius XI told Vice Chancellor Fritz von Papen, himself a leading Catholic, how pleased, quote, he was that the German government now had at its head a man uncompromisingly opposed to communism, unquote. Now, is this true that Hitler and Mussolini were praised by the Pope and church leaders? And sometimes
well, certainly not as he tries to portray it. Possibly in the early days there were some statements made by individual church members. I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt it. But to prove that this person never said this is much more difficult than to prove that he did. And I'd like to know what references he gives, if any references, to those rather wild statements. The fact is that when Mussolini and Hitler revealed their hands, the church opposed them, absolutely. And insofar as the church could, or anyone could at that time, the Pope was in a very difficult spot. Pope Pius XII was in a very difficult spot. He had urged the condemnation of Nazism in one of the countries of Northern Europe, and the Nazis responded by imprisoning 40,000 people, most of them Jews. And the Pope was concerned about speaking out what would happen if the Pope spoke. He was afraid that they might unleash a purge of as many as 2 million. And of course the Pope was actively protecting these people in many of the monasteries and convents all over Europe. And so he decided to adopt other methods, you know, to try to shield them from the brunt of the Nazi attack without making matters worse. If they want to question his judgment on that, that's one thing, but to question his goodwill is another. Not only that, but Pope Pius was it Pius XI or Pius XII who wrote Mit brennender Sorge, which is the encyclical written in German, attacking Nazism on the rise. It was written back in the late 1930s, before the beginning of World War II. So that Pope Pius XI wrote in the encyclical Divini Redemptoris, in which he condemned atheistic socialism, communism. And he also, that was followed up by an attack on Nazism, which is simply another form of socialism.
And you know what? If he took it to another step, you could say everyone was linked with Hitler almost. I remember there was a very dear friend of ours, a lady who was Jewish, who happened to live both under communism and under Nazism. And while I was still alive, I said, how could Jews vote for Hitler? Because this is a historical fact that they did vote for him, especially after he wrote Mein Kampf. And she told me, she said no one took him seriously when he about that book. So to say that, you know, in the heat of the moment in political realms that someone could have voted or did something when they didn't have the full picture is a very unfair way to form a characterization. But just about what you said, here's a tactical use. He'll use someone who's a modernist or for example, he quotes Karl Adam, who was a modernist Catholic, and as if he were the voice of the church, and he said, attributed to the church through Adam, the statement that National Socialism and Catholics belong together as nature and grace. The German bishops in the early 1930s forbade Catholics to be members of the National Socialist Party.
Well, Pius XI, in Divini Redemptoris on atheistic communism, wrote, "It is impossible for an individual to be a true Catholic and a sincere socialist at the same time. And they're mutually exclusive terms. So I don't know if that quote from Carl Adam is accurate or not, Julius. I think you actually investigated some of the citations he does give in the book and found that his citations were not accurate.
Well, there's like three categories. Sometimes he'll make a remark which someone who's reasonably well-versed in history might scratch their heads and say, wow, that doesn't really make sense, and there's no cite whatsoever, so you have to take it on his credibility that it's true. Other times, he'll give a cite for a remark which might be once removed. In other words, you'll find that so-and-so said Pope said this, and this so-and-so might be a very anti-Catholic person, so then you'd have to dig through that book and try to find the cite. The third one is he will cite the source themselves. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not quite. I mean, there's the famous use of the ellipse, like you could say, Father Jenkins, ... killed 3 people Thursday, October 15th, and it could have been Father Jenkins was Cincinnati. Joe Smith, on Thursday, October 15th, killed 3 people. So when you start using ellipses, it's, you know, a lot, if a lot can go in between.
Let me point out for those who might have joined us a little late that we're talking about this book by a man named Dave Hunt, A Woman Rides the Beast, which is an attack on the Catholic Church. This book has been making the rounds here. I guess someone gave it to you. A gentleman, in fact, who was hoping that you'd read the book and see the errors of your Catholic belief.
Well, I read it with an open mind and an open heart, and I started doing the research, and frankly, I was shocked and astonished by the inaccuracies and how consistent they are. And maybe we can even move ahead, but I'd like to remind our viewers you're watching, and I would also like to say this. There were a number of books published many years ago which are now available again called Radio Replies. It's a 3-volume set. Here's 1 volume. And it's thousands and thousands of questions asked by, say, Protestants about why do Catholics believe this? Why do Catholics believe this? And they are answered by a radio priest in Australia and one in the United States as well. If you are seriously interested to see the other side, and to see these objections dealt with at greater length, and innumerable objections, you name it, the selling of indulgences, the treatment of Galileo, and so forth, please call us. We'll put you in touch with someone who can get you these books. They're really a very, very good source for really trying to find out what the Catholic Church really teaches and how she has responded to many of her critics. Father Jenkins, another it's interesting, he mentions, sadly he quotes, the Roman Catholic Church fits the description, mother of harlots and abominations, as precisely as she fits others. Then she says, much of the cause can be traced to the unbiblical demand that priests be celibates. Do you find that, is this a bit of a leap to come to that conclusion, that celibacy caused this characterization of his?
Oh, sure, it's ridiculous. Yeah. According to his definition and the distortions that he presents here, yeah, he's trying to make a case. He's like an unscrupulous prosecuting attorney who will dredge up anything he can in order to attack someone's character, in this case the character of the Catholic Church. I've read that part of the book that he devotes to celibacy, and he takes Luther's approach that celibacy is practically impossible. I think this says something about the mentality of the man, because let's face it, Julius, I mean, people practice celibacy for a lot of things that are very important to them. There are men who devote their lives to science for the sake of, you know, serving mankind, to find discoveries that will deliver mankind from disease and so on. And of course, the world praises people like that. But if you practice celibacy, if you devote your life single-mindedly to God and to the service of the salvation of souls, then oh, you can't do that, that's impossible, we find that abhorrent. Luther, you know, renounced his own vow of celibacy and eloped with a nun. And I don't know how happy that home was, but in any case, the fact is this man not only calumniates the Church, but he calumniates hundreds of thousands of Catholic priests and religious sisters who made their vow of celibacy for Christ's sake and kept it heroically. He has to accept the fact that Jesus himself was celibate. and that he lived his life dedicated to a certain mission that God the Father had given to him. Now, again, he's a worthy son of Martin Luther, this Dave Hunt, because Martin Luther in his Tischrede, his table talk, at least implied, if didn't come right out and say so, that Jesus Christ himself was guilty of fornication with Mary Magdalene.
On 3 occasions. He actually said that, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a terrible blasphemy coming from the mouths of this man, who is considered a great spiritual light. Mm-hmm. And Dave Hunt really does belong in the lineage of Martin Luther. This is a mentality to deny. By the way, you know what is really odd? Saint Paul, right? The one whom the Protestants claim to idolize. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I shouldn't use that term because they would rebel against the term. But the one whom they claim to follow so carefully in his theology spoke very clearly about the preference of remaining celibate over getting married. And he said, "This I tell you, that it is better not to marry if you don't have to," right? Mm-hmm. And they reject that, and yet at the same time they claim that they're biblical. And
he also said, St. Paul, that for those who can take it, let them take it, referring to celibacy. Mm-hmm. You've been watching What Catholics Believe. We've been discussing